and welcome to Kalia's Corner. My name is Kalia, and this is my corner, obviously. And this is a channel where I talk about popular culture and how it relates to my own experiences. You can call them video essays, but I'm just talking about myself. So, you saw the topic of the video, so let's get into the video. So, today I'm going to be talking about the suffering artist trope because I feel like it's a trope that I've experienced and seen throughout my time as a writer, throughout my time in college as an English major. This like pretentious idea that suffering is what makes our art good and authentic and real. And I wanted to kind of understand where it came from and why it's still so pervasive within creative communities, creative spaces. So, in terms of roots, I learned that Plato viewed mania, which is a part of bipolar disorder, as divine, essentially seeing it as being guided by the god, specifically Apollo, into the ability to create. So it kind of justifies this idea of suffering as creation because it's being divinely justified. And I feel like we see this a lot with a lot of classic artists, a lot of classic writers like Van Gogh, Sylvia Plath, who I have many issues with, but I won't get into that today, and Ernest Hemingway. And seeing their mental illness like shine through their work and also reconciling with the fact that a lot of their works are seen as classics. And I kind of wanted to get into the reason why I think this is something that is being pushed onto artists everywhere, creatives everywhere. For me, I feel like I fell into this trope because I viewed suffering as enlightenment. So, what I mean by that is I believe that suffering and just negativity in general was more realistic and it brought me closer to seeing the world for how it truly is, seeing things for how they truly are, and being able to produce work that is authentic and basically gave me my creative fuel. And I think when you rely on suffering as a source of your creativity, it definitely makes you feel like your work is never going to be good enough, like you're not confident in your work, you never feel satisfied, you're jealous of other creatives. And I also think for me as a writer, it definitely caused me to experience a lot of writer's block because I viewed my source of creativity, my only source of creativity, as my suffering. So if I'm not currently going through like a depressive episode or an anxiety attack or something like that, something where I'm in a negative headspace, I can't write. And it caused me to be unable to write consistently, which is like integral to being a writer, a creative in general. And I was able to confront this through my favorite show, BoJack Horseman, and the character Diane Nguyen. And she talks about this idea of good damage. And I wrote an essay about that on my Substack called Good Damage is an Oxymoron. If you want to go check that out, would love that. Would love your support. But essentially, if you don't want to go see it, good damage essentially is the idea that our suffering makes us unique. It makes us able to create meaningful and long lasting work. And this idea that if we're able to create with our trauma, if we're able to make things with our trauma, the damage, the trauma, it was worth it. And I didn't realize until I watched that idea that we are our most creative selves when we are suffering, it definitely made me realize that I was justifying the trauma I had went through and those that had inflicted it upon me, letting them off the hook essentially by saying that the trauma helped me to create something beautiful. Because again, if I was able to create something beautiful out of what I went through, then it was essentially worth it. Then it was fine that I went through the trauma. Then it was actually good that I went through this trauma. And I feel like that idea that trauma, it makes you stronger, it makes you who you are as a person. I feel like there's some truth into that, but I also feel like it perpetuates a negative idea that like when you go through trauma, it's fine. It's okay. And it happens for a reason. And I don't feel like trauma happens for any kind of reason. I feel like trauma happens because people can be shitty. People can be awful. They can be terrible people. And there's just no use in justifying your trauma and the people that inflicted it upon you by saying that it's supposed to make you stronger. There's a reason for it happening. It's just not true. I put this in the lens of Black culture as well. because I feel like Black culture is very, very deeply intertwined and rooted, honestly, in trauma, slavery, with Jim Crow, with segregation, all of these dark things in American history. Black culture is essentially a product of it. And Black culture is so beautiful that so many people try to emulate it. So many people try to imitate it. And I kind of made this connection through my visit to the National Museum of African American Music in Nashville. I went there the other day. It was a very eye opening experience as to kind of the root of all music, of all Black music, gospel, blues, jazz, R&B, hip hop, all of that is rooted in Black trauma. It's rooted in the issues that we faced in the past and the issues that we are facing in the present. And I essentially realized by holding this belief that trauma is justified, that I was justifying the atrocious acts, the suffering, the damage done onto the Black community because we were able to make something beautiful out of it. And that's not right, because what white people did to us will never be okay, should never be justified, even if we were able to make something incredibly beautiful out of our suffering. Our tragedy wasn't the reason we were able to create. We created in spite of our tragedy. We created because we were suffering and we needed a way to heal, to cope, to have hope. We weren't given the ability to create through our suffering, through white people's mistreatment of us. I also feel like I was able to connect this to Black Christianity. If you know me, you know that I personally have kind of a complicated relationship with religion, and I was able to understand why so many Black people fall into Christianity. And that's because it's a means of hope. It's a means of reconciliation and community and healing. I definitely think that Christianity has a very complicated history within the Black community because it was forced upon us by white people. But I also think that we were able to make it our own through the creation of Black churches and using them for social justice issues, the creation of gospel music, the creation of praise breaks, all of these things that are integral to Black Christianity, Black churches. We were able to create that out of what was forced upon us. Through that, we were able to use Christianity as a means of hope rather than a means of tragedy. We were able to kind of switch that narrative. I feel like for a very long time, I considered myself to be more superior and more intelligent than Black Christians because I understood the history of Black Christianity. I understood where it came from. I understood how it was brought into Black communities, and honestly the damage that it does to Black communities, because it does do damage, and I won't sit here and lie to you and say that it doesn't. And I do believe that some Black Christians and Christians in general, to be honest, can be very, I don't want to say insufferable, but I'm going to say insufferable. I do think that there's this means of using Christianity as a way to shame others and a way of scaring people to fall in line and to only depend on God. I do think that is a problem, because this idea that we have to essentially lose everything to get back to our faith, I don't like that. I don't like that. I don't like that there's this idea perpetuated about a God that is basically like, you can only depend on me and I'm going to take everything away from you so that you can understand that I'm the only path you need. I do think that is wrong. But I do think that through my superiority, I was definitely depriving myself of community, depriving myself of understanding other people, and believing that I was essentially holier than thou, which is insane because it's kind of like what I was trying to get away from in the very first place. I was trying to get away from the idea that there are people that are better than others. And I was perpetuating that by being like, well, I'm better than Black Christians because I'm smarter, because I understand what our history is. Essentially, I just feel like with Christianity, it's wrong to push it onto other people. It's wrong to use it as a means of defining what a good person is, defining if you are a good person, and using that as the only means to define if you are a good person. But if something is able to give you hope, as a Black person especially, if something is able to make you feel good, to make you feel good about life, then who are we to judge Black Christians? Who are we to sit here and say that what they believe is wrong? I think that's a really hard concept for me to grasp because I do feel so removed from Christianity because of its roots, because of its history. But I also understand now that people can understand that, or people can not understand that, and they can still find hope in Christianity. And I cannot tell them what they are allowed to believe because it gives them hope, it gives them peace, it gives them happiness. And who am I to take that away from them? Who am I to take that away? I think that even though Christianity in the Black community stems from trauma, again, we were able to make it our own. We were able to begin using it as a means of hope and reconciliation. And that's really all you can ask for. That's really all you can ask for. That's really all that you can do to continue trying to live the life that you want to live, to continue living. I watch Sinners, so spoiler alert if you haven't watched Sinners, which why haven't you watched Sinners? What's wrong with you? But if you haven't watched it and you're gonna go watch it, click off. Within Sinners, there's this idea with the vampires that the only way we could be free is through death. The only way we can find peace and truly be happy and truly be able to live in communion with each other is through death. That's just not right to me. That's not right to me. And I think a lot of Black people can fall into this idea of hopelessness, this idea that the only way I can be free, the only way I can be happy is if I die. The only way I can find that is if I die. Even though I do find issue within Black Christianity, the one thing that I can say about it, the one thing that I am beginning to understand is that it gives people hope, and it gives people the strength and courage to continue living and believing that there is a good life on earth, that there is a good life for them to live while they are alive. And I don't think that should be taken for granted. I don't think that should be disregarded. And I want to bring up kind of what inspired me to create this video. So I'm reading The Artist's Way right now. I'm on week 1. It's only been like 2 or 3 days, and I'm on week 1, and I've been doing my my morning pages, and my artist date was taking myself to the National Museum of African American Music. Usually in the introduction, it talks about the idea of the suffering artist. And one thing that really struck me is that it talks about the suffering artist as lacking taking accountability. We blame our art on our mental illness. We have these random sparks of creativity instead of being consistent and instead of using our gifts in a way that is actually beneficial to us. There was this like passage where she talks about how she was essentially scared to find the ability to create without her alcohol addiction. And it's because if I'm able to create sober, then what was my excuse for not doing it before? And I think that's really important to talk about because I do think that the suffering artist is unable to take accountability, um, because they see their suffering as a way of channeling their creativity, as a fuel for their creativity. So they kind of also spread that. And I think that's wrong. I think that spreading the narrative that you can only create meaningful, good work through suffering is wrong. She also addresses a reason as to why we may think that, and she says that pain essentially causes us to look into the details. What I think that she means by that essentially is that when we have bad days, we hold on to those days. We remember every detail. We remember exactly the time, the date, what we were doing, what we were eating, where we were, stuff like that. We remember those details about bad days, but when we have good days, we don't remember anything about them. We just kind of let them pass. And I think that's what she means by we look into the details when we are in pain versus when we are not, when we are happy, when we are content. I personally feel like that's something that I do a lot. This idea that my good days are just kind of not worth mentioning about, which is bad because because I feel like I have way more good days than I have bad days, or I have more neutral days than I have bad days. And I think it's important to remember that too. And I think that with these morning pages, I'm starting to understand like the value of a neutral or a good day. Writing down about those days, writing the details about those days in these morning pages so that I don't forget them, that I don't disregard them in favor of memorializing the bad ones. She also talks about this idea of the mood to create, being in the mood to create, and feeling like we can only create if we are in the right kind of situation. There has to be perfect conditions for the days that we create, and how that is a fallacy. Definitely fallen into this fallacy that there needs to be a right mood for me to be in to create something. And I feel like it goes into this idea of like inspiration striking, and again this inconsistency with how we create. And I think that the idea that we need to be in a mood to create, or that we need to wait till inspiration strikes, is not sustainable. And it's also not nurturing. It's not nurturing our creativity. And the last thing that she mentions that I feel was so profound and I felt so deeply is that you need to nurture yourself. You need to heal. You need to go through healing to be a creative, to sustain creativity, to nurture your creativity, rather than criticizing yourself and perpetuating self-loathing. And I've definitely struggled with that idea of needing to be kind to myself in order to create, because I've always felt like my best works come from when I am in the lowest mood. But I think that this idea that I can continue to create and create meaningful things even as a happy, content person is life changing. As I go through the artist way, as I go through these weeks, which also, if you want me to kind of document my experience, would love to do that. Just ask me in the comments, whatever, to do it. Let me know if you want me to do it. But as I go through the artist way, as I go through this book, I think that I will discover a lot more within myself, and do a lot of healing and a lot of nurturing. And hopefully that does have positive effects on my creativity. But yeah, that's my video for today. Hope you enjoyed. I really enjoyed talking about this topic, and I want to talk about more things like it. So if you have any topics that you want me to talk about, research, do a video about, just put it down in the comments below. My Substack and my TikTok are linked in the description box below. And thank you for watching, and I would appreciate your support. And yeah, thank you so much. Bye.